with the top of the modulator valve chamber. On Honda engine 600s, a BY4 anti-lock braking system is now fitted when specified. It's a new system, so we'll look at it in more detail. The hydraulics are all in one assembly. An ECU is located underneath a centre console. Incidentally, to service the ECU, you must remove the complete centre console. Don't attempt to prise up the gear lever veneer finisher, you'll break it. The ECU operation is similar to the previous system. Its main function being the logic section, taking inputs from the wheel sensors, calculating the vehicle reference speed and controlling the modulator solenoid valves. Its sub-functions are to control the modulator pump, the fail-safe relays and the self-diagnosis system. The construction and function of the pulsars and wheel speed sensors hasn't changed, and an air gap of 0.4 to 1 millimetre applies to all the wheels. As I said before, the hydraulics are all in one assembly, this modulator. It contains the pump to supply high-pressure fluid, an accumulator to store it, a pressure switch to control accumulator pressure, and then the solenoid valves, pistons, etc., to control pressure to the brake calipers. Fail-safe relays for the system are behind the fuse and relay box at the right-hand rear of the engine bay. If a fault is detected, the relays are de-energised, which in turn cuts the electrical supply to the solenoid valves. They're then prevented from operating and the ABS system is deactivated. Now a word about diagnosis. You'll find the maintenance and diagnostic connector under the passenger seat. It's used for microcheck simulation testing and when bleeding the high-pressure system. You'll find the diagnostic connector for fault codes at the bottom of the A post, the left-hand A post on the right-hand drive cars like this one, and at the right-hand post on left-hand drives. Incidentally, make sure you find the 2-pin connector and not the 3-pin connector near it. To make the diagnosis, first bridge the fault code's diagnostic connector and switch on the ignition. Don't start the engine. The ABS warning light will come on for 2 seconds to check that the bulb is working and then go out. After 2 more seconds, the light will then flash any fault codes present in the ECU, up to a maximum of 3, each separated by a 5-second pause. If you want to repeat the codes, turn the ignition off and on again. When you're ready to clear the ECU memory, simply remove fuse B2 in the ABS relay and fuse box. It's the middle fuse in this row. Just keep it out for more than 3 seconds, and don't forget to take out the bridge in the diagnostic connector. Incidentally, if you're using microcheck, it can only see hard faults. That is, faults that are present at the time it's used. If the vehicle has an intermittent fault, it will not necessarily be present when microcheck is on. But you can still identify that fault by looking at the warning light flash code. Next, checks and servicing. If you need to do any work on the modulator fluid system, you must relieve the high fluid pressure like this. Remove the bleed nipple cap, fit a wrench to the nipple, connect a bleed tube and slowly open the nipple up to 1/4 of a turn. Don't open it quickly, there's about 3000 psi in there and you might get a nasty surprise. Keep the nipple open until the fluid stops running, then tighten it. The fluid pressure in the system has now been relieved and you can work on the component parts. For example, if you have to change the modulator itself, after relieving the high pressure, you can now disconnect all the hydraulic pipes in safety, but you must protect the open ends from dirt entry. Before refitting the modulator, it's a good idea to remove the bulk of the air from the reservoir like this. Fill it with fluid to the max mark, then carefully tilt the modulator to one side, approximately 45 degrees like this. You can now refit it, and then top up the reservoir and bleed the system in the normal way, using tool SMD 4081. Finally, turn on the ignition and check that the ABS warning light operates correctly. The accumulator on this system is an integral part of the modulator and cannot be renewed separately. But it has to be depressurized like this before disposal. Relieve the high-pressure fluid, as we did just now, and remove the modulator. Hold it in a vise with this relief plug pointing upwards. Slowly loosen the plug by 3 half turns and then wait for at least 3 minutes until all pressure has escaped. You can now remove the plug completely and dispose of the modulator. If you have to change the fluid in the high pressure system, do it like this. First, bleed off the high pressure slowly as we showed you just now, then leave the nipple open. Make sure the tube is still in the container and start the engine. Run the engine until the reservoir is empty, then switch off and tighten the nipple. Obviously, air has entered the system during draining, so refill the reservoir and bleed it like this. Fill the reservoir with new fluid to the maximum mark. Start the engine, let it idle until the modulator pump stops, then switch it off. Connect bleed tool SMD 4081 to the maintenance connector under the passenger seat and carry out a bleed procedure just as you would for an ABS 6 system. When you've done that, bleed fluid from the modulator. Then continue to repeat the bleed procedure until you get bubble-free fluid from the modulator. Don't forget to keep the reservoir topped up. Finally, start the engine and check that the ABS warning light goes out. There is one important check that we want to tell you about. The modulator contains a valve which must close the fluid port to the solenoid valves if the high pressure system fails, so that conventional braking is maintained. Make the check like this. Relieve the high pressure system, as we showed you before, then raise the car off the ground, wheel free, making sure it's safe. Get someone to press the brake pedal while you check that none of the wheels can turn. Check that the bleed nipple is tight, then fill the reservoir to the max mark. Pour the fluid slowly and allow air bubbles to disperse. Start the engine and let it idle for at least a minute, then switch off. Check the reservoir level, which should now be below the max mark, and top it up again. Finally, start the engine and check that the ABS warning light goes out. Well, we're nearly at the end of this update video, but before we finish, a quick word about the introduction of the 200 PS turbo engine in the 800. The model is called the Vitesse Sport, and in keeping with this image, the suspension has been modified and lowered. Shorter springs all round give a trim height 20mm lower. Stiffer rate bushes are fitted to the lower arm, and the dampers are modified. Well, that completes this Technician's Update number 5. Thanks for watching.